Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Wednesday evening. We have a special event here at Clear Mountain YouTube channel. This is our first live interview, and we are so happy to have Ajahn Kusalo here with us. So yeah, welcome, Ajahn Kusalo. We're so happy that you have joined us.
Thank you.
So I'll just read a quick biography of Ajahn, and then we'll jump into questions, and people are welcome to enter questions into the chat as you're so inclined, and we'll probably try to find ways to introduce those into the conversation. And then at 6:45, as usual, I'll head over into the Zoom room for the Clear Mountain chat, and Tanisabo will continue the conversation here on YouTube. So Ajahn Kusalo is the current abbot of Bodhinyanarama Monastery in Wellington, New Zealand. Born in 1952, he grew up in Auckland. A checkered pattern of study and work, mostly in the building industry, eventually resulted in qualification as a quantity surveyor. However, a general disinterest in worldly gain led to many years of wandering throughout Australia. Around 1980, he met Ajahn Jāgaro in Perth, Australia, and joined retreats led by Ajahn Sumedho, who visited there for 2 consecutive years. Still married with 1 son, it was not until 1990 that he was able to join Ajahn Viradhammo in Bodhinyanarama, where he took bhikkhu ordination in 1992. Remaining there until 1994, when there was an invitation to join Ajahn Sumedho in England. 6 years at Amaravati Monastery led to 2 years in Wales, a precursor to 2 years of wandering around Europe. Part of this time was a 3-week trip to Canada that eventually resulted in his living there for 8 years. The last 5 of those being spent establishing Tisarana Monastery, west of Ottawa. A short visit to Bodhinyanarama in New Zealand in 2011 resulted in Ajahn Kusalo moving back there in 2012, and he's been there as the abbot ever since.
And it happens to be Ajahn Kusalo's tomorrow, I believe, 70th birthday, 30th monk birthday, and 10th birthday as abbot of the monastery. Is that correct, Ajahn?
That's it. The decade party. Will be
Happy decade party, Ajahn. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
And one other thing which you didn't mention in the bio was that he received his prakru, I guess it's an appointment or a prakru. It's a ecclesiastical title in the Thai system of monastic life. It's a pretty high title. Like if someone gets that title, when you come back to your monastery, there's almost like a big parade. I don't know. Some places there might even be elephants involved, but I imagine it didn't happen in New Zealand. But yeah, so Tanajan, just jumping into some questions. I think most of the people who are zooming in live will be well aware that things on the global news scale are starting to heat up and get even more wild and fractious than usual. And I'm curious if you have any advice for practitioners and even monks, if any monks might view this, how to relate to news in general. I mean, do you recommend, I think some monks recommend just going cold turkey, that saying practitioners shouldn't watch any news at all. Some people say that you need to be involved and need to be keeping up with current events, and that's a duty for anyone who's in a role of possibly doing a kind of counseling. What approach would you take for what advice would you give for practitioners in terms of media consumption?
Minimal. I err towards the first. I personally have almost zero interest in politics, although it's pretty much impossible to avoid at different levels. There's monastic politics within a monastery, within a group of monasteries, just human beings. That seems to be our nature. Mostly, like I only heard a couple of days ago talking with a lay friend who said, what did I think about, the situation in Ukraine? And I had no idea. So I Googled it, and the Russians are moving in, and I figured probably people are dying. So what am I going to do? Probably nothing. I mean, my sphere of influence is quite limited. If I felt that there was something I could do, I have been on one demonstration. The Vietnam War was a big thing when I was younger. I did go on a demonstration, but it was merely to accompany a young lady to be involved. I think my particular calling is not, fixing the world in terms of legislation, law, this kind of thing. The fundamental problem is greed, hatred, and delusion. The work of a monk is to transcend those. If everybody could do that, there would be no war. It's quite simple. So my personal interest in relation to my personal sphere of influence. So that's what I encourage people, is to meditate, take up a religious path. Obviously, Buddhism is what I would specifically recommend, but it doesn't really matter. Something that has a strong moral foundation, a reflective dimension to it. And the rest kind of takes care of itself. So mostly in terms of news, people come here offering dana, or just coming here and having a chat and so forth. I get to hear about stuff that's going on. It's not like we're a closed order, so we are involved with the world, but not in. I'm not particularly interested in getting entangled. I mean, we've also got big COVID demonstrations here around government mandates and so forth, people losing their jobs. And, so I can understand and kind of trying to get a perspective from both sides. I have my own personal approach to COVID, the vaccine, all of that kind of stuff. So some people are naturally inclined to demonstrate, to write letters to the editor of the newspaper, to petition Parliament, all of these kinds of things. For me, not personally. And in terms of like serious Dhamma practice, we talk about living the homeless life. The 10 reflections. I am no longer living according to worldly aims and values. So I'm living according to spiritual values. So the news, wars, these are nothing new. In the entire human history. In fact, I mean, this particular, the last various decades, been less people die in conflict than there ever has been. So overall, I mean, my hope is that human consciousness is awakening. People are becoming more aware, more sensitive, less parochial, less fundamentalist. There is a kind of an opening, and extrapolating that, my hope is that such things will continue to diminish. But yeah, just conflict. You both live in monastic environments with kitchens and people who work in kitchens and have long and lengthy debates about how to cut the carrots, and it's a question of scale. And of course, I watched one short video and there were rockets being fired and things exploding, and invariably people being killed. I mean, it's how can you say it's not awful? It is. It's that kind of thing. How do we deal with it? And for me, starting with my own heart, the anger, the frustration, the delusion, these kinds of things in my own heart. If I could deal with that, there's a force that's created through the kind of work that we undertake monastically. Is not to be underestimated. It's not particularly flashy, maybe, but there is a considerable power there. So yeah, and just encouraging people. Newspapers. What do you particularly gain? And just a question: what am I going to do with the information that I've collected? Most people don't do anything other than just become indignant and righteous and angry and all of these, which is not at all helpful. If it's going to turn into some kind of positive action, so be it. But generally, yeah, keeping the mind quiet, keeping the eyes clean, the ears clean, of such things. Yeah.
Ajahn, thank you. Do you, as an abbot, you're in a bit of a unique role. I mean, you can pull back yourself, but if you have junior monks staying at your monastery, like I knew when I was a young monk at Abhayagiri, we had very strict, internet use policies or even computer use policies. Everybody gave up their cell phones when they came to the monastery, and you could use the computer once, for an hour, twice a week. Do you have any kind of like measures that you use to kind of curb the younger monks' internet consumption or news consumption?
Yeah, I mean, just first of all, assuming a degree of maturity, that people who go as far as taking ordination, I mean, whether it's anagarika or samanera, going further to ordain as a bhikkhu, you have to figure that they are actually interested in being free of suffering. So we look at, Four Noble Truths. The cause of suffering is craving. The desire to, keep up with the football scores or whatever, or just news. There is a certain kind of addictive, obsessive dynamic that some people, as I say, I personally don't, can get caught up in. So renunciation is a way of getting perspective on that. So yeah, we have policies. We have a monastery or a sangha library that has a computer in it. It's an older one, so there's a limitation to start with. And yeah, so like anagarika, just once a week. I say an hour, but I've never timed. And currently, our anagarika is the guest coordinator, so he has to spend a bit more time answering emails and so forth, and keeping open. So I inquire, meeting regularly with people. I think the process of communication. What are you up to? Again, back to the 10 reflections. The days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well am I spending my time? To have that question asked of you by a peer, and to ask it of oneself, hopefully. So, and being offered some guidance, some framework. Some people might think that 2 or 3 hours a day on the computer is using their time well. In a group meeting within a community, that people share their various perspectives, can often very effectively bring that into balance, particularly from those more experienced in monastic life. So yeah, it's mostly though. We're a relatively small community, and we're a sangha of 6 at the moment. Another one coming tomorrow. So it's relatively self-regulatory. I prefer relying on people's nobility and sense of honour rather than legislation. Offer some guidelines for sure, but mostly just trust that people are going to find a point of balance, and sometimes just allowing people to tip over the edge, and they're awake all night with nightmares about whatever it is, or fantasies, or around the different thing. I mean, internet is just insane. There's 6 million galaxies and universes all in one little box. It's incredible. And how far do I want to, go into that? So,
well done, John. That's very, very generous. I don't know if I would have been a trustworthy young monk at your monastery, but I'm glad that you are so generous to your monks. I did have a kind of a related question. I had heard from one of my friends who also knows you. He had mentioned that you had actually programmed or written. You had designed your own website. Is that correct? So you do know programming, or is that correct? Or is that yeah. So how do you relate to that? Like, I have a number of monk friends who are Majjhima monks, so have been in robes for, living at a monastery maybe for 5 to 10 years. And the ones who used to be programmers, like before they ordained, are the most militant against computer use. They're the ones who try to say, no one should be able to use the computer at all. They're the ones who try to, kick the computer out of their life. One of my friends who I'm thinking of says that he has to stay away from programming because it just messes up his meditation. And that he'll be constantly thinking about algorithms or logarithms or something. He'll be writing code when he's supposed to be meditating. But another monk said that, actually his programming is a way of cultivating samadhi for him. And I'm curious what your take is. How does your programming, is it a type of Dhamma practice, or is it a distraction, or is it somewhere in between?
So, I got introduced to computers when I first came here in 1990, as you mentioned. There was an old IBM up in what's now the sewing room, and I like making stuff. So when you think about so the monastery website, Bodhinyanarama website, that's entirely my creation. The whole the interface, as well as the content management system in the back. I built that. It's gone through a number of incarnations, but anyway, so there was a website needed, so I built a website. It's like if the door falls off its hinges, you put it back on, or you need a box to put some pencils in, you build a box. So this craft of the heart, this way of interact. I mean, what we're doing until we've realized the unconditioned, until we're enlightened, we're working in the realm of the conditioned. I mean, that's what we use. We use different meditation techniques. They're conditioned. We use form, chanting, bowing, these kinds of things. These are conditioned forms. Language. We read books. We write books. So forth. We do stuff like this. This is a creative process. We're creating something here. So I don't actually see there's that much of a difference. I do see when I am in a bout, as it were. I've got the events calendar. I just put some final touches to a new version of that. So when I'm in that mode, that's what's in the mind. It's like when it's very sunny at the moment, so it's quite warm, so I don't have a hat on. I'm kind of in hatless mode. And when it's cold, I put my hat on. So the way that we interface, or the way that we relate to the world, is it's contextual. I mean, so watching when it becomes obsessive, when it, like we're talking about news and so forth. There's nothing particularly wrong with the news. So as I say, when I found out about Ukraine, I had a look. I read a few articles, and one thing and another. And while I was there, I had a look at the COVID protest at Parliament. But that was enough. it's when we get stuck, and the challenge of the practitioner, the meditator, is to really develop a very sensitive attunement to our relationship with conditions with other human beings. Obviously, the monastic living celibate, we're very sensitive to the relationships that we have, people generally, relationships with women, relationships, I mean, we don't have a relationship with money, so we're very sensitive to when it's being presented or when it's available. So similarly, the things that we undertake, you think of crafts, as I say, I do a lot of woodwork. Same thing when I'm currently building a tent. The first model has been created and tested, and I'm working on the second version, the upgrade. So it's only natural that tent things come into my head. And in terms of practice, and think of meditation practice, if one's focused, if the focus of one's practice is developing jhana or developing samadhi, yeah, these things can be regarded as intrusive. But if one is just maintaining an open awareness of just life, of this, it's always this present moment, sitting here. My headphone cord is a bit short. Yeah, I just become aware of that. I'm moving back and it's going quite. So I slide my laptop a bit closer. So it's the attachment, the upadana, really. That's pancha upadana khandha, one way that the Buddha defined suffering in the Dhammacakka Sutta. So it's when we get caught up to the kind of quality of adhesion that worldly conditions can catch us. So yeah, I mean, some monks write books, and some monks, I mean, the whole Zoom thing, I've generally avoided it. It doesn't interest. Some have just taken to it and they're away. They're doing, I don't know, I'm not keeping score, but well, whatever, all power to you, if that's what works. So, I mean, generally, in terms of being the abbot here, similarly to the computer thing, a sense of allowing enough rope so that maybe some characters, not necessarily hang themselves, but maybe feel a slight strangulation for, like going into things. Cheese and chocolate allowables. We don't have any limit. Do people eat too much? Well, maybe they just need to eat too much to know what it feels like to be just like pigged out on chocolate. Like, God, I used to do it with alcohol. It took a while, but eventually I kind of got the idea. So, although the possible distractions in the monastery are relatively limited, that kind of idea that we do, it's not a matter of being regimented or legislated, it's a matter of understanding. Really, we need to understand for ourselves, with guidance and with the protection, the container of a monastic community and spiritual friends. So, yeah, computer coding is, I love it. It's kind of fun.
Ajahn, what would you say to those of us who feel as if we're caught with I know that Ajahn Sona has said that a lot of practitioners are in the state of having one foot in the monastery and one foot on a banana peel, and you talk about kind of trying to find peace within conditions, yet I know a lot of practitioners who really feel this sense of discomfort where they don't have the container of the monastery, they're hungry for the Dhamma, and yet they have a child to take care of or a job, which it is really hard. I mean, it's the headphone cord, which is always kind of dragging them back to the computer, or some other metaphor. What have you found to be helpful advice for people who, really want to go deeper in the Dhamma and find that the conditions of their lives as lay people aren't aligning completely with where their hearts are?
If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen.
Say that again?
If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. But I mean, it's easy enough to say. So I used to, when I very early days in Canada, before I started setting up a Tisarana, I was in Thunder Bay for a year. I was in Toronto for about a year. Anyway, I used to regularly meet with a group who were developing voluntary simplicity, and they were very interested in how we do it monastically and trying to find ways that they could implement that in lay life. So yeah, just as a question for people who are by necessity having to work, kids, motor car, taxes, all of that stuff, what can you get rid of? How can you make it more simple? I.e., not watch the news. I.e., use parental control for oneself as an adult. So there has to be a sense that I can drink less coffee, eat less sugar. I mean, how can we actually use conditions, or the absence of conditions, the same thing, to transcend conditions? This is ultimately what we're looking for, is to develop an insight into the nature of the unconditioned. So to really explore, keep a track of a day. What do I do in the course of a day? And what can I not do? So things like you're driving and you come to a traffic light. I think they're universally read, aren't they, when you have to stop? So rather than send another text or make a call or just sit and look at the red light, and that becomes your meditation object. And then you're looking at the lights and you'll see when it goes green, and then you drive off. So you just sit there and you breathe in and you breathe out and you breathe in. Do you have to? I mean, is your life so hectic that you can't take that, while you're waiting for the computer to boot up or waiting for somebody to answer the phone? There are spaces, there are gaps, and to use those to turn to stillness, to turn to silence, turn to the breath, or some other kind of mnemonic. You have beads in your pocket, or a mantra that you chant, or something that's going to incline you towards, by association, stillness, silence, Dhamma in the broader sense, I guess. And then looking at ways of extending that, the creation of a shrine, some physical point of reference wherever you live that's kept clean, that's kept orderly, that just, so visually you see that, whether it's got a Buddha image on it or objects in nature. So we're looking at ways of reorienting, recalibrating life in a way that does, as much as possible, and there are of course limitations, but as much as possible relates to Dhamma. I mean, I could go on considerable length, but the challenge, of course, is actually remembering to remember. I mean, most people are kind of nodding and saying, yeah, that sense. That's a good idea, but we have to remember, when there is a pause, and I get the choice between sending another text, making it or whatever, or just sitting quietly, to remember, well, that option is there. That option is sitting on the, if you're commuting on a train or a bus, to actually consciously set aside some time. Maybe you do have to read the report prior to the meeting or some such, but to actually dedicate some time just to simply close the eyes and turn inwards. The breath is definitely probably the best meditation object. So portable, no batteries required. Don't know about yours.
Ajahn, you spoke about the wars in the kitchen over how you peel carrots. And certainly I think, in terms of what keeps many of us from settling into those small gaps is we fill them with, obviously greed, anger, and delusion, or thoughts based in those. I'm curious if you have any, for me, anger sometimes is the most stubborn. And I'm curious if you have what your means of working with anger have been, specifically that, as a part to the just standard kind of developing metta. Have you found that any specific reflections have helped you move through times in the kitchen or elsewhere and put down anger?
I've always tended to be more of a lust type than an anger type. So it's not the pursuit of sensual pleasure and so forth, of which anger is the antithesis. It doesn't. So how many? I mean, we need to just as a general point of reference. I'm quite a fan of Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Mm-hmm.
He's a Canadian social commentator, philosopher, professor, whatever. Anyway, one of his quotes, or I don't necessarily agree with everything he has, but I kind of enjoy his style. Paraphrase of one of his quotes is that if we're going to have a serious conversation, the sensitivity of the topic increases the chances of offence. So if we're going to talk about politics, say, and you're really stuck with anti-war and demonstrating and throwing Molotov cocktails or something, and we're trying to develop an understanding between each other, we have to we have to open to the possibility of me being offended, that you offend me, and you have to, if we're going to have a serious conversation, you have to allow that perhaps through my insensitivity or my unfamiliarity with your personality or whatever, that I'm going to offend you. So internalizing that, I have to have that conversation with this guy. And the ring for a while. So I have the conversation, the topic is that of anger. And if I am going to challenge myself, if I'm going to say, look, Kusalo, what is this all about? Why do you get so angry? What's the problem? I don't want to talk about it. Stop being, stop bugging me, or whatever, those kind of internal dialogues that we do get involved with. If I am seriously interested in having that discussion, obviously to come to some kind of understanding or resolution, I have to run that risk of being upset or frustrated or caught in doubt or shame, whatever, guilt, all of these things. I have to be open to that. So in terms of meditation, I generally these days I'm much more towards just open awareness. So if an angry thought arises, well, that's what's arisen. That's the current condition. It's the state of now with this reality. So who are you? Are you interested in a discussion? I mean, now's the time to talk, because here you are, you're here and I'm here. Shall we talk about this? No, I'll just go away. Or whatever, who's talking to who here, really? But we do that. There's some kind of dialogue takes place. So anger, I think most people will agree when they're not angry, that anger is quite destructive. It's harmful. It's certainly unpleasant. Really, well, some people do, sense of power and all of that stuff. But I think when they're alone in bed at night or whatever with their eyes closed, anger. So it needs to be it needs to be engaged with. It needs to be understood. Really, I need to inquire. A certain amount of psychoanalysis, maybe, some issue with my childhood, or just certain kinds of people. I need to explore what are the kind of triggers, what particular conditions activate. But the process needs to be dynamic. It's not passive. There's no kind of pill or a particular thing. There's work to be done. Picking up, it's like when the computer won't work. I've just been given a new tablet. My old one is about a decade old, so for my birthday. It's very frustrating because it's not like the old one, and a lot of the old apps I was using don't work. Why don't they work? Or do I need to adjust some setting? It's quite challenging. But the only way I'm going to work it out, I can go on the internet, well spend an hour trying to. But I need to engage. I need to make an inquiry into why is this not flowing? Why is this not peaceful? Why is this not sort of joining up, connecting? And that can be quite uncomfortable.
Tanajan, you talk about that your main practice is open awareness at present, and I'm curious if you could say more about maintaining that open awareness. One, what are the markers that help you stay aware and awake in that openness, and also how you maintain that when you're doing any of these things we're talking about, when you're going on the internet, when you're checking the news, when you're making a tent, when you're dealing with people in the kitchen or dealing with your own mind states. How do you maintain that open awareness and not just let it frizzle out or kind of cloud out?
I guess that kind of structure of seeing benefits, dangers, and escape, that's a really nice one. So, everybody has a degree of awareness. They do. Otherwise they'd be dead just crossing a road. So as you're walking along, are you interested? Where is the mind? Is it lost, wondering, thinking about what's for lunch, or, some argument you had, or some special, plan that you've got cooked up, and there's not a presence there, and you fall in the hole in the road, or you walk into the tree, or trip over the brick, or that's unpleasant. That's painful. There is a danger. So recognizing that the Dhammapada quote, heedlessness is the same as being, heedfulness is the path to the deathless. The heedless are as if already dead. That when you see it in extreme, so like someone who's really drunk or something like that, or lost in anger, blind with anger, that's a contemporary expression. Someone who is literally blind. It's like they're dead to their reality. They just have no idea who's there. That's the, after the drunken party, God, do you remember? Oh, no, I don't remember that. Did I really do that? How embarrassing. So seeing, just extrapolating, just extending that, the idea, you see, well, okay, so being 10% awake means I only have, 90% accidents. Being 20% awake means I have only 80% accidents, blah, blah, blah. Being completely awake, one's still, just the conditioned world is the way it is. So, the scene that the Buddha had with Devadatta and all sorts of, the stuff that he had to deal with. That's just the nature of the conditioned world. But one, the degrees of clear connection, one's finger on the pulse of life, of this life. This is the point of reference, orientation. You know, these little holes I spy with my little holes. What? You know, the world around me. And internally and externally, for me personally, not particularly so different. So the challenge, of course, is actually bringing that, because there are so many distractions. You know, just the way you're talking, you figure that the orientation is, in this context, is more in terms of lay people. You know, the phone's ringing, the kids are screaming, you know, the kettle's boiling, these things. Someone's knocking at the door, trying to, but to really see that each one of those events, or awareness of those events, is singular. I become aware of somebody knocking at the door, and then I sort of turn my head and I see, well, the kettle's boiling, or these kinds of things. The idea of multitasking, it's not, it is sequential. It's not happening at the same time. So just simply, I mean, in terms of basic meditation practice, developing mindfulness of the breath. And for me, the difference between sati and samadhi, it gets a bit semantic to a point. Obviously, we can make that distinction. They are different, like my left hand and my right hand. Get them on screen. There we go. My camera is actually back to front for some reason. It's mirrored. But yeah, my left hand is not the same as my right hand, but they're obviously the same thing, joined, connected. So sati and samadhi are just different modes or facets of the mind, the working of the mind. So developing that ability just simply to be aware, fully, completely aware of one in-breath, and honing that as a skill, that skill translates into being aware of the kettle boiling or someone knocking at the door. And recognizing it's a condition that has arisen. That's all it is. The tendency to create these things as problems is where we get caught. Oh my God, hang on, I've got to deal with the kids and screaming at the person at the door. And, well, I don't know, do I answer the door? Well, we just do what we do. The tendency to create it as these things as being problematic. There can be quite a few of them, and stress is real enough, for sure. And you know how that affects us physically and so forth, but just seeing that a condition arises in the mind, a sound, a sight, tactile sensation, whatever, a memory, we recognize it as that. Then we can consider what we might do with it. And that can happen quite quickly, for sure. It's not that it has to be this long contemplative space, which many people don't have. But starting, you know, with something simple like just awareness of one in-breath, it's exactly the same as awareness of somebody having a panic attack, or even if it's me. It's the same thing.
Ajahn, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to slide out to that Zoom meeting, but I hope to be able to pay respects to you in person at some point in the not too distant future. So, Tan Nisabo will stay on. Yeah.
I will. So, thank you, Ajahn. And for those who want, they can find the Zoom link halfway down the webpage of clearmountainmonastery.org. But I'll continue to speak with Ajahn Kusalo for another few minutes, as long as we can keep them. And so people can stay on here and participate in the conversation as well. Ajahn, I wondered, you told me that you said you just returned from a 2-week Tudong. Would you be interested at all in describing, you know, did you have any specific, why do you go Tudong so often? And what's your most, what's the memory of, or the Tudong that stuck out for you the most out of your lifetime of them?
Why I go Tudong, get out of the office. Unplug. Of course, coming back, this recent one away for 2 weeks, coming back after 2 weeks and having to play catch up. I don't know. the dynamic of Tudong is particularly as a monk, is entering into the realm of uncertainty. So with no money and no food, can't cook, can't store food. So people can offer food, but we can't store it beyond midday. How's that going to work? Short answer, in practice, it actually works quite well. So we had people said, don't go to the South Island, there's a tornado coming, or cyclone, or whatever it was. And yeah, we spent our first night, pouring rain next to a river. It was rising. It was quite in flood. We were confident enough that we would be safe, and as it turns out, we were. We ended up next to another river, another torrential downpour, and we were not safe. We literally had to make a scramble and get out of there, literally running. We had about an hour and a half to get to the mouth of the river, to a more open ground. So to deliberately put oneself in, not necessarily in places of difficulty, but just places of uncertainty, don't know. And that's where we always are. Like right now, what's going to happen next? Don't know. Who did? You weren't expecting that.
I didn't expect that. It's true.
So going back to awareness, we just simply need to be aware. So one simple example, we got dropped off at a junction. Not a relatively easy junction. We were hitchhiking, so relatively easy junction, but we figured that it was late enough in the afternoon, so we made our way to a river. We ended up spending a couple of nights there. On the second day, we walked into the village, very small, maybe, I don't know, a dozen houses or more. Really nothing. Anyway, it was just no plan. What is in the morning, what to do. It just tune into whatever. And then I spotted a lady off in the distance, and she was sort of looking, and so I looked back and gave her a little wave. She waved back and looked interested, so I walked over, and next minute we're sitting down to bacon and eggs and nice cup of hot tea and stroking the cat and generally having a delightful conversation with this woman, and then more toast came and local honey came, and I mean, that was our meal for the day. It wasn't what you'd call a substantial meal, but certainly enough. But just that being open to just what the world offers, and sometimes what it offers is truly unpleasant. I mean, we did get very wet quite sometimes. We walked up one river. It was raining, not very heavily, but it was a beautiful, absolutely stunning river. But the track involved quite a number of crossings, so you had to find a point where to cross and so forth. Anyway, on the way back, the river was even higher. Short story, I got swept away. So, bumpity bump down the river and then into the whirlpool at the end of the rapids, and obviously I lived to tell the tale, but totally unexpected. And there I am. We were about, at that stage, at least an hour's walk from our camp. What to do? I was still relatively warm from our earlier walk, so just keep moving. Logic says don't stand there and get cold. It's like the coffee cart's not coming by. So you just choose to do what seems to be the best thing to do. So we just kept walking, and as it turns out, we made it to a place, and the local civil defence guy came by because there was quite a storm, and he was just checking on different places, and he found us, kind of huddled in a shed. So he ended up contacting some people, and those people came down and offered to help out. And then the next morning, some Another guy came down who was actually married to a Thai woman. So we ended up in their place, more toast and bacon and eggs. I mean, the visibility as a monk and what that represents as an archetype, going walkabout under such kind of constraints, really does make a difference. But it's so inspiring to see when one presents oneself almost completely vulnerable, defenseless, powerless, helpless, how people respond. There's so much goodness in the world. It's really quite beautiful. So that's one of the reasons, it's very in terms of faith and human goodness. We go back to talking about war, and we can turn our focus and our annoyance and indignation or whatever on that, or we can turn our attention towards beauty, towards goodness, towards kindness, generosity. And what's the result in terms of how I'm living my life as best I can? So Tudong's great. I mean, growing New Zealand has such a powerful nature. It's a relatively young country geologically. The mountains, the rivers, the seas, the lakes, the fjords, it's just stunning and relatively accessible. It's not that difficult to get to, and there's not that many people. Against people.
You speak about the benefit of seeing the kindness around you, and I find these stories from Tudong are so encouraging, and I think people are really hungry for them as well. I don't know if you had any specific other moments that have stuck out from your lifetime of Tudong, even in Europe or elsewhere. I know you wandered for 2 years in Europe. Is there any other stories which you tend to tell or go to, or which you could share with us? Sort of demonstrating the goodness that you've encountered.
They're just zillions.
Might be too big of a question.
Just people paying for a toilet. It's not uncommon that you have to pay to get into the toilet, and of course I have no money. And what's another thing? So those kinds of things, being in a queue, and people taking the initiative to help, to offer, being in a like a check-in luggage queue, and you have to pay. It's a bit over. You have to pay extra on the bag, and so they haven't got any money. And somebody behind picks up on that and comes forward and says, "Well, how much is it?" It's only $10. Oh, yeah, I can do that. There is a hunger in. I mean, I sometimes joke. People say, "Oh, what do you monks do anyway?" So I make myself available to receive your offerings. And you think, what are the opportunities that people have to just be unboundedly generous with birthdays? People are usually, there's some kind of a gift, and people full of that kind of spirit of honoring and giving to the person whose birthday it is. Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas. The opportunities just to give something small, like a drink, or and certainly the food thing, that's a regular. I can remember on my Tudong, there were two of us standing outside the bakery, and one woman came up, was going to give us some money, and I did the usual, sort of explained, we don't accept money, but if you wanted to use that money to buy some food, that would be a possibility. So off she went. Next minute, another lady comes up and kind of grabs me by says, come on. I was saying, she said, I know what to do. So I said, have you have you had encounters and dealings with monks before? She said, no, I watched the documentary. I know what to do. Come on, I'm going to feed you. I'm Joan. She said, like Joan of Arc. She said, come with me. So, I mean, we waited for the lady to come back, give us a pie each. And then off we went with Joan to the sushi place. She just filled up plates for us and paid for it, and off she went. It's just, like you just left sitting there going, what just happened? You got to drag through town. So things like that. Generosity is because we are so dependent. It does create that opportunity, and giving is a metaphor for non-attachment. When something's given, we have to let go, and to give so unconditionally it brings a lot of joy, both for the recipient and the donor, I find.
Ajahn, how can lay people have that same experience of surrendering to the goodness of the world to feel it? I don't know how many of them have the explicit, opportunity for Tudong, or maybe they do. What would you say? How could a layperson kind of have some similar insight? Even in their daily life.
Yeah. No, start by recognizing it in themselves. I one of the way Salakon retreats, we do that chant. Some of our listeners might be familiar with Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. So we usually translate it as homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. So I say to people, so are you a blessing to the world? Everybody sort of looks around. I say, well, are you a curse? No. So there's part of your being that is a blessing. How would you talk about that? Even if a rhetorical question, how would you talk about that internally? What is it about your life that's actually a blessing? Homage to the blessed, noble. Are you noble? Is there nobility in your life? How would you talk about that, or how would you define? Just using that particular traditional chant as a reference, but that principle to it doesn't have to be analysed. Just recognise that I'm a good person. I've done quite a bit of prison work, so going into most recently in the maximum security, which is not that far from here, talking to the guys there along those lines and getting them to find things about themselves that are basically good. So, well, you've welcomed me here, and really nicely. They all come and shake my hands, and you get a genuine sense of welcome. I often joke to them, I said, what are you guys doing in here? You seem like such nice people. They're all murderers. Or when you say they are murderers, at some time they have murdered somebody. It doesn't define them as a murderer. There's some kind of ultimate box that I'm locked in. So for each of us, the tendency to dwell on that which is negative, on the war in the Ukraine, the problem with COVID and things like that, there are so many random acts of kindness, that kind of thing. There's websites, you could Google that if you want. People that do things, and they're inspiring. Oh, I could do that. I could do that. I could just greet somebody. It's quite nice. Increased density of population tends to limit that. Coming back to New Zealand, there's just less people. People wave and say hi and just walking on the street. In cities like London, my son lives in Los Angeles, I've been there. People less so. They think you're a bit weird. You're just a complete stranger. Say, hi, how's it going? Well, what do you want? But one works within the limits of one's environment, but recognizing that those limits are often disproportionately self-imposed. We can step out, and people who react negatively to positive offerings, well, we just move on to the next one and find people who are, or we sense that they're just defensively cynical or something like that, and maybe we should try again. And we recognize something in them that can be touched. But certainly starting with oneself, there are a great number of things right here that can be touched, that can be warmed, can be loved, can be awoken. And it's not egotistical, I'm so kind, I'm so generous, all of that. It's just a recognition of this is a quality, or however nascent it is, it's a quality that I'm aware of within myself. And then exploring that, because we're not so different. Kindness is kindness, regardless of the country. So, yeah.
Ajahn, thank you. I know we have to let you go about now, but I was wondering if you have time for another question or so.
Sure, yeah. I'm not afraid to go.
You spoke about your own, about the struggle with drinking, and also about working in prisons. And I'm curious, with suffering of addiction of that of a deep level, or of suffering like someone in prison might be encountering, and the whole idea of redemption. What if for your own work with addiction, what did you find was the most powerful, skillful means that helped you, or the most, what helped, and then what has helped the prisoners the most? I hope that's not too personal.
No, for my own thing, really, the solution was burning in hell. just hit a gigantic brick wall, or fell into a pit of fire, or I don't know, whatever. I was pretty stuck. I mean, with drugs. Just something snapped. All the lights went out, or and I couldn't continue. So depending on the degree of addiction is the strength of the solution. And sometimes people do really have to hit bottom, because intellectually you can recognize that there's some kind of an issue. People go to AA, the first thing alcoholics, the first thing they have to do is stand up and say, I'm an alcoholic and I need help. There has to be some kind of recognition. It's a subject that comes up a lot. We get a few addiction groups coming here, just small groups come for a visit and chat and so forth. And there's some really nasty stuff around these days. I'd probably be dead by now. Honestly, just seeing the dangers, it is a difficult one. There's really no creating as many points of reference in the other direction. Placebos, substitutes, alternatives. My father was addicted to cigarettes, as was I for 20 years. He took up sucking peppermints. He just became addicted to sucking peppermints. Which, at least it's a transition. It's basically peppermints are just sugar. So, could be a lot worse. So how do we, wherever we are, we can imagine a place that we want to be, and ultimately we want to be enlightened, which is not a place, of course, but is a state of being. Very difficult to imagine, the condition, the unborn, the unoriginated, like, it doesn't bring many images to mind in terms of trying to relate to that. But I can recognize the condition, the born, the formed, and consider my relationship with aspects of that and ways of modifying. You know, like if you're living with somebody who's particularly difficult, you know, thinking, how can I approach them? How can we have that discussion, that serious discussion, and run the risk of offence in both directions? But how can I move towards that in some way? So with addiction, it's a relationship with an aspect of the conditioned world. So how can I modify that? How can I approach that? How can I enter into some dialogue with that? I can bring along a friend, like a bag of peppermints can be a friend. I've done quite a lot of work with young people, working with kids, dialoguing using puppets, to be able to develop an understanding of a child's world, not necessarily difficulty, but sometimes. The puppets can say things that the people would never say, could never say. I used to do two, Scum and Lionel.
Scum.
Kids, Scum the punk python, and Lionel the lovable lamb. And they were kind of the polar aspects of my character. And they could between them, they could dialogue about some really difficult subjects, you know, in a group situation. And you know, it was for the kids initially, but then the parents were coming, then the sangha was coming. Started to get a bit out of hand, actually. I didn't know quite where it was all going, and eventually what tipped the scale was the kids. I used to do a bunch of other things as a preliminary, and they weren't always so interesting, and the kids started chanting, "We want scum, we want scum, we want scum." Oh, God. They don't want Lionel. They're much more interested in scum.
No one wants Lionel. So.
No, but as a metaphor for my own world, do I so easily become preoccupied with scum? Or can I actually? Lionel's not so interesting, but Lionel had a lot of friends. Scum didn't have any friends. He was such a cynical, sour, kind of grumpy, self-seeking, all of that. And he had no friends other than Lionel. So they used to dialogue to each other. You know, Scum always felt a lot better after a good talk with Lionel. So yeah, the mechanisms that we can employ to, in terms of self, I mean, or spiritual friends, like, you know, I mean, these days the social connections are a bit patchy, actually. Used to be that you'd go and talk to your grandmother or auntie, or often women, or just a trusted older relative who was maybe retired and calm and quiet and wise and so forth, and you could go and talk to them about your problems and stuff like that. Now you've got to pay a therapist. So the value, at least with internal dialogue, if it's honest and open, it doesn't have to be that complicated. It just has to be honest. Or with the development of Kalyanamitta, spiritual friends, is such an important. So in terms of people working with their addictions, just talking generally about people developing practice in lay life, however small the group, just a little local group, put an ad in the local paper, the people who are interested. Let's just get together and have a coffee and talk about things that really matter to us. And it helps if there's somebody who's a competent kind of neutral facilitator. But yeah, you only need two people to enter into meaningful dialogue. I can be both of them.
I'm guessing you didn't try the puppets with the prisoners, Ajahn. Is this true?
I mean, just getting them in. Just
True.
I've recently been approached by one of the chaplains of the prison about Buddha statues, and I suggested that we could have, because part of my work with kids, I've made silicon molds and cast Buddha images. We have Buddha making workshops. The metaphor is intentional. I suggested doing that in the prison. I just see bringing various bags of white powder into the prison might arouse a certain amount of suspicion. I haven't heard back from him yet. Yeah, it's an unfortunate realm. Very difficult. Very difficult. But we all of us, in the place that we are, and we can only move anywhere from the point that we are. In terms of those two, this wholesome and unwholesome, that we set up mechanisms or points of references, shrines, pictures, Buddha images, a little book of poetry that we read every now and then, or inspired sayings, or anything like that is going to, bring a little bit of brightness to the mind. It's surprising how little it takes to help us remember, to kindle. It's like being in a dark place. Just one match, it's completely dark. How much that can illuminate. I lived in Wales for a couple of years. I used to go into the old slate mines. There's so many of them, and they're just amazing, just totally silent and totally black, totally still. And just turn off, the headlamp and things. But I did also have box of matches. And there was that thing, just one match. It's amazing how much space that would illuminate to be able to do that in one's own heart. Developing mechanisms, points of connection. Very important.
Well, Ajahn, I feel like this has been one such point. I so appreciate you coming and speaking with us. It's been about an hour and 15 minutes. So
yes,
I know you just got almost swept down a river and down a whirlpool, so we should let you recover before your birthday.
No, it was, what was it? We got back on Thursday, and today is Thursday. Yeah, so it's 2 weeks. We actually had Marga Puja as part of that trip next to Lake Rotoiti, which was we just camped next to the lake. Absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. So yeah, I'm pretty recovered from that. So do you have a sense of how many people connect with this?
Yeah, we have 30 still watching actually. So
oh really?
Yeah, and there was about 40 before then, and then probably some people will watch afterwards. So
yeah, sure. Yeah. No, good for you. So yeah, just a general invitation, COVID permitting, to come to New Zealand. We have an extremely beautiful
and
situation.
what's your website, Ajahn, so people can find that?
Bodhinyanarama.net.nz. Okay,
that is confusing, but I think we can do it.
No, just if people Google Wellington Monastery, that'll do it. So Wellington is the capital city of New Zealand, and we are the middle of Middle Earth. There you go.
That's a reference us Americans will get. That's very helpful. Thank you.
So Wellington
the Shire and yes,
the Shire of Stokes Valley. Yeah, if I could change the name, it's Ajahn Sumedho's fault. I blame him. He named the place. Trying to spell out the email address over the phone. It's a nightmare. So, but yeah, just Googling Wellington Monastery will get you here. Okay.
Thank you, Ajahn, so much. And,
brilliant. Yeah, and good luck with your project.
Thank you. If you ever, yes, we'd love to have you over here in Seattle. If you ever feel like, taking a leap over the Pacific, you'd be most welcome. So
So
We don't have any place for you to stay yet. I'm just in a little hut behind some people's house, but eventually.
Yeah. Where's I think I mentioned my son lives in Los Angeles. Where's Seattle in relation to LA?
We're north of there, but maybe 15 hours away by car or so. Maybe a bit longer. So we're better. We're better. You should visit us.
Yeah. So, and in terms of San Francisco,
maybe might be more like 12 hours from here to San Francisco, and so maybe more like 16 to LA or so. Something like that.
Yeah. The distances. I mean, New Zealand is such a small country. Really is. I love it. You can get around. Everybody knows everybody. Not quite.
I've always wanted to go.
Yeah, well, it's I mean, hopefully the borders. I mean, it's been a real hassle here because with the Sangha changing, usually monks come for a year or two. It tends to be two, and then they kind of move on and then go back to their home country. But we can't, in terms of getting replacements, getting monks coming in. We've got a new monk coming tomorrow. He'll be here for. Well, we'll see how he fits in. It's hopefully that's all going to open up again. Anyway, very nice chatting with you, and keep in touch with
thank you, Ajahn, really
news, whatever. Okay,
and, we're getting some nice comments on the people who've appreciated the talk, so lots of thank yous.
So how do I get out of here?
All right, see you, Ajahn. Namaste Khan.
Yeah, take care.